Hello and welcome to yet another edition of hrtech.sg's Tech Talks. And it's my pleasure to host Charles Ferguson, General Manager, Asia Pacific Globalization Partners. Globalization Partners focus on flattening the barriers to global business by making it easy for companies to hire employees anywhere in the world across 187 countries. In fact, that platform allows companies to hire employees without having to navigate the complex international legal, tax, and HR issues. And today we're going to be engaging with Charles on a range of aspects focused on the world of HR tech. Thank you very much, Charles, for being on our show today.
It's a pleasure to be here. I really am looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. The first question is, which is the question that I ask everyone when I meet up is, what are the top business and talent challenges that your clients are facing at this point of time?
It's a wonderful question. The whole dynamic around sort of talent from the beginning of the value chain of talent, i.e. acquisition or even spotting, talent spotting. And I've been using this might sound a little cliche, but I'm using the term 21st century talent spotting as kind of my verbal go-to-market when it comes to this topic around talent. So from how do you actually, really spot the type of talent that's going to be able to perform in your company culture, but also doing that in a remote context is one of the key challenges that every company is facing right now, regardless of size. I think that there is a unique inherent opportunity to this, which I'll speak to in just a moment. You mentioned business and talent challenges. I mean, I think that in my view, the two are inextricably linked. The businesses are being challenged because they don't have access to the right types of talent. And I have spoken pretty broadly on the topic of the global talent war. And it's by any stretch of imagination, it's the longest war in history. And I think that it is evolving at a pretty rapid clip. My premise or my thesis is sort of predicated upon two essential ideas. One is that now is probably one of the most unprecedented times in history to hire great talent. We've all heard, depending upon when folks view this online, there's the great tsunami of people quitting their roles that everyone's sort of wringing their hands around and lamenting right now. One aspect of that is, employee engagement and retention and different types of policies to keep talent, on board that you've worked so hard to gain. The flip side to that, the silver line to the story, is that there is as I just said, an unprecedented opportunity to go out and tap on talent that heretofore would have been much more difficult to find, attract, and acquire. So there's that aspect, and then there's the other aspect of kind of 21st century talent spotting that I think, if you get it right, HR practitioners are going to have a tremendous sort of leapfrogging effect over their competition, because it's fairly simple to go out and use platforms like LinkedIn and others to tap into the pool and understand the universe that's available. It's a different sort of exercise to truly profile and understand the characteristics that are going to be hallmarks of success in your particular environment, particularly when the engagement is not face-to-face, when it's on this remote platform, right? Technology is an enabler, but it's not the panacea, right? So I've been advocating this kind of model of, first of all, HR needs to sit down with their constituents in the firm and look at this current phase of the changes that are happening in the world. By the way, segue, this conversation, I'm going to try as little as possible to use either the words COVID or pandemic, okay? So I'm going to use some terms like the current situation that we're all facing. And I call this out because, as Churchill said famously back in his day, never waste a good crisis, right? And right now we have this unique opportunity to do several things as HR leaders and as technology advocates. fundamentally, the most important in my view is to go back to basics. And what does that mean? It means we probably are resting on our mission and our values and our vision for the firm that's been in place for a decade plus in many instances, or since the inception of the firm in many cases, because of the changes that have happened in technology, in society, in trade, et cetera, et cetera. This is a brilliant opportunity to sit down and revisit who we are as a company, what our values are, what success should look like. And with that kind of consensus among the leaders in the business, then we can actually go out and rewrite job specs, rewrite descriptions, rewrite our priorities around what we want to do with technology, as an example. And I think that if we don't do that, we're being reactive to what we perceive is happening in the market versus proactive about where we actually want to go with our business. And so if we have that fundamental block in place, then we can go out and start to look for the types of candidates that exhibit the characteristics that align with our newly sort of fomented direction. Things like determination, insight, curiosity, engagement, the types of characteristics are going to be successful when we're engaging every day on a platform just like this, right? And I'll say this to not labor the point any further, but I've been with this company for over a year, and by virtue of policies that were favorable at various points in Singapore to go outside, I've met some of my Singapore colleagues, but I've never met anybody else in the world in this company. I was found, interviewed, onboarded, and managed literally through a Zoom window. In this case, some people would be Google, Team Meets, whatever it is. My point being, this is the world we operate in. And so now it's not so much about what's the technology agenda or what's the technology strategy per se. It's about how do we leverage all of these various pieces together to differentiate ourselves and take advantage of the opportunity, right?
That's right. Well, very well said. In fact, one of the key things that we really focus on, Charles, is that how do we leverage technology and ensure that HR teams drive business outcomes? It's not just to deliver the HR agenda, but drive the business agenda. And once that is done, the HR teams are definitely going to get the seat back at the decision-making table. And that's where we want to move to the next question, right? So in the new hybrid workplace that you're talking about, where you are not just spotted, hired, onboarded virtually, this pandemic or the current situation, as you say, has completely changed the way we communicate with our employees, we manage their performance, how we reward them, how we engage with them. Everything has definitely changed. So what do you think is going to be the role of HR in this digital transformation that we are seeing?
Mate, that's an excellent point. And I think that many HR departments or practitioners or leaders are probably already on this edge of the curve, but many perhaps might not have yet gotten there because, to varying degrees, depending upon the segment that you operate in or your industry or potentially even what market you're in, the way and means by which the community and the government and the businesses are reacting to these changes is highly disparate, right? I know that the audience for this particular conversation is primarily in Singapore, but I'm sure that people from all over the world will at some point or another touch on this platform and see this type of messaging. So some of the things that I would suggest to you would be that we, from an HR community perspective, if we think about maybe 5 years ago, the majority, not all, but the majority of companies would look at HR perhaps through maybe two lenses. One lens is the traditional classic lens of personnel and administration. Check the box, keep the engine running. And this is if I may be so bold as to say, this is an antiquated, laggard perspective of what HR, the potential of HR, and what HR is actually doing for the business. The other lens, maybe 5 years ago, that people look through is, hey, we need to ensure that we've got enough bench strength to keep the business running. So that's going up the curve on value, but it's not quite to the point that it's being viewed appropriately in my perspective. What's happened suddenly was because of what we've just gone through, with the changes that have swept through the marketplace over the past 24 months, the entire world very quickly put the human resources, human capital management function right at the tip of the spear, right front and center. They became, teachers, psychiatrists, doctors, nurses. I mean, HR did everything to try and keep the business afloat. And with that, a lot of the reality hit the business leadership very quickly that when you think about the people component, which drives 70% of the cost in an organization, but it's also those people that innovate and drive growth, and change and deliver the value for the entire business. Because of what's happened and the disintermediation of a lot of these factors, globalization, demographics, compliance, integration, talent, all these different pieces have come together. And now they're asking HR to look at how we recover and rebuild our revenue, how we rebuild operations, how we rethink the organization, how we accelerate the adoption of digital solutions. Basically, how do we go from surviving to thriving, and even beyond thriving, how do we accelerate, right? So in my view, the question isn't necessarily, how should HR, I think HR should be owning the digital transformation. Because if a company isn't acting as a people-centric business right now, then they're missing a trick, right? And so HR, frankly, really needs to be, designing and executing a comprehensive program around upskilling and reskilling, and that the thing that excites me, Sriram, is that the people component of a business cuts across every single discipline. So HR is kind of the glue that drives the business. The technology aspect, the relationship between the CIO, CTO, and the CHRO, and the CFO, and any other C-suite member should be, explicitly linked. And I think that the opportunity to drive that, I mentioned the upskilling and reskilling. There's, employee wellness programs that need to be in place, digitizing and automating human resources processes. If you think about, if I were in a large organization looking at transformation, one of the first elements that I would be focused on is how do we take core, repetitive, rote aspects of the operation of human resources and automate those so that HR can get back to the work of actually becoming a differentiation in the business rather than an administration in the business. So things like the very basics of payroll process, or the very basics of compliance reporting and things of this nature should be almost as a no-brainer, to use a very American term, focused on for robotic process automation. And when you win that, when you kick those goals, you can use that as a template, because success breeds success. Then you go to the finance organization, then you go to the operations organization, et cetera. But it should start with people first. Once you've freed up the HR team and some of the ancillary businesses that support those processes, like FP&A, et cetera, the ripple effect of positivity and goodwill is going to act as a catalyst for a whole litany of new projects. But HR should be absolutely in the center of anything that has anything to do with digitization or automation.
Very well said, Charles. In fact, we are seeing that in the marketplace, where companies are really putting in employee experience right alongside customer experience.
Totally.
And that's happened in the last 12 months, definitely. So which means, as you mentioned, HR is the glue that binds all of these functions together and should be the key driver of the digital transformation.
I agree.
Companies completely are sold on to it, right? They know that they have to invest in technology. But when we see Singapore, for example, right, we are way ahead in terms of digital transformation overall. But when it comes to HR technology adoption, we're still lagging behind a lot of our peers. why do you think companies are not still investing as much in HR technology?
It's really frustrating to me, and I agree with you. I see it as a lagging kind of indicator when it comes to measuring the effectiveness of a company's digital transformation strategy. They look at HR and they're like, we'll get there. I think it's because a lot of companies, on the one hand, they might be misclassifying what HR technology actually does and what it's about. When you think about, and I'm not advocating one stack over another, but I'm just talking about companies that have a pretty good track record of advocating broader inclusiveness to the HR function in the stack of tech. So an ERP vendor, as an example, I think when an Oracle NetSuite or a SAP Business by Design or a Workday try to extrapolate and remove modules from the value proposition and sell it individually, companies then have this perspective of mutually exclusive type of function. And they don't understand that even if you look at the pure architecture of the tech, the workflows and the modules and the configurations are intrinsically linked with one another across finance and operations and HR, et cetera. And that just goes to show you that even the software engineers know that you can't separate these things from one another. I think that a lot of companies are, frankly, falling prey to the tyranny of choice. There are a bazillion, and you can look that up, I'm sure it's a real number. There are a bazillion different options, right, for solving a particular technology, a particular HR function challenge, right? And it leads to, I mentioned this tyranny of choice. It's before you start to go out and adopt these technologies, before you start going out to try and buy a solution to a problem you haven't yet defined, right? Meaning I'm buying these solutions, now I need to go find a problem to solve with it. And a lot of companies do this. You've got to have a pragmatic approach to your kind of consumption of these technologies. What are you trying to focus on? Don't jump on the first thing that comes across the bow. Make it about the user, right? Understand what the user challenge is and how the user is going to be using the technology. You've got to really understand the cultural implications of these things, right? You've got to understand the ability for the culture to digest and adapt to the new way of operation. And I would suggest to you on that topic, as an example, that given what we've all gone through, everyone who's watching this should pat themselves on the back, because we did collectively as a nation, for example, pivot on a dime and go remote. And I've worked for companies that recently who were absolutely, completely verifiably not set up to have any semblance of access to remote work. No way. Wasn't culturally acceptable, wasn't by policy acceptable, wasn't enabled through even access to Wi-Fi or laptops, right? Like they had no hope in hell of surviving what's just happened. And they have come back through the other side, completely resilient and absolutely on top, right? They've necessity is the mother of invention, right? So here we are with this kind of amazing new world we're operating in, where a lot of those cross my arms and that'll never happen on my watch kind of mentality has been swept aside by circumstance. Now I believe that vendors of technology need to seize on this opportunity and say, look, you've got this unique opportunity now to rebuild your culture, rebuild your kind of adaptability to new technology. Here's what we should suggest that you move forward with. It's taking advantage of disruption, right?
That's right.
I do think that a lot of HR tech is not adopted because it's done in a silo, which I mentioned. So look, we just said a moment ago with each other that the HR function is exciting because it cuts across every part of the business. Bring sales into the conversation, bring marketing into the conversation, bring finance into the conversation, get everybody bought in on how and why this is going to make an impact on the productivity of the business, not just for HR, right? I think that, and by the way, lastly, I would say this it's not a one and done. I mean, there's always going to be evolution and change, and it's an ongoing process. But I think that it's often the case that companies go out, they buy it, and it becomes shelfware. It becomes stuck in the ether, and that there's this, you've got to be more proactive than that.
Very well said on that. In fact, when we talk to some of the CEOs and probably CFOs too, right, Charles?
Yeah.
Their feedback is that, hey, the HR teams, when they present the business case for a HR tech investment, they do not talk dollars and cents, right? I mean, they do not talk the business language. They still talk about it from an employee satisfaction or an employee attrition, but that does not get converted into dollars and cents. And the CEOs and the CFOs just talk about that, right? So I think the HR teams also have to start talking the business language. And then I think
100%.
The last mile can be covered for sure.
I totally agree with you, mate. I mean, look, if you, every year I read the Deloitte Human Capital Trends report that comes out, right? And the one in APAC almost consistently for the past 3 years has called out, 85% of why HR is putting into place new technologies is around the chief motivator being cost savings, right? And 75%, the second motivating factor is in greater effectiveness of the organization. Taking that and, look, we're all human beings here. You need to do something. You've discovered what the challenges are, what you think the roadblocks or the bottlenecks are. Instead of building the business case and then presenting it, get everybody involved in the beginning. Hey, Mrs. CFO, Mr. CFO, here's what I see. This is based on my expertise, where the challenges are. Let's work together to build a business case. And it might turn out that you're wrong. Great. Like, I hope that you don't have to go out and spend millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars on something. Maybe it's something super simple point solution that you can subscribe to for $50 a month online. That would be lovely. But it could be the case you have to revamp an entire portion of your technology landscape and architecture to modernize and be effective. Sit down and build the business case with the business. Then it's not about presenting it to the business. It's about the business presenting it maybe to the shareholders or the board or whomever it might be to get buy-in. But if everybody's on board with the narrative, because everybody's got their fingerprints on the, I won't say murder weapon, they've got their fingerprints all over the strategy for improvement, then there won't be a debate, right?
That's right. Consensus approach and talking the business language is definitely going to help. So that's a good segue to the next question, Charles. So looking into the glass in front of you, right? Yeah. Can you forecast how? I mean, we said we should not use the word post-pandemic, but
we can. We've done really well so far. So let's throw it out there. Go for it.
Okay, sure. So how do you think globalization partners or your clients, how does the scenario look like in a post-pandemic workplace?
It's exciting to me. We've been talking about sort of the promise of what the outcomes unintended of this post-pandemic world are for quite a long time, before we even had the word COVID, right? We were sort of strategizing in forums about what the future of work would look like. And in that future, as painted, for the past decade, there was a high degree of focus and investment, frankly, made around the promises of my ability to work from anywhere I wanted to work, whenever I wanted to work, and create my own schedule, and learn whatever I wanted to learn, whenever I wanted to learn it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of what, if you read back on surveys of HR practitioners, maybe even 5 years ago, a lot of the hand-wringing and nervousness and sleepless nights was about this cliche concept of how are we going to manage the climax community of millennials and baby boomers and Gen Xers and all those generations mashed together. And who are the strawberry generation of snowflakes that have all this entitlement, blah, blah, blah. Well, here's the news flash, right? The news flash is that all those things that the younger workforce are bringing up as their vision for what they wanted to be successful are now table stakes across the entire landscape of the workplace, because we're all in the same boat now. Everything's been democratized. Again, I have to preface this and be fair and accurate. Everything I'm saying is spoken from the construct and context of the information worker. Clearly, there are different experiences for folks in retail and food and beverage and factories and a whole litany of other very critical businesses that keep the universe running. But in this office-oriented information worker space, a lot of those changes have become table stakes.
That's right.
I would suggest to you that and this is also going to sound a little bit trite and academic, but it's true, where we were reacting to a situation out of necessity, the train has left the station, right? We ain't going back to the office the way that it was. It's just not happening. So where companies that are coming to us and the types of services that we're putting out there with respect to employer of record, we're seeing heretofore our use case driver was predominantly around companies that wanted to expand into a new market. They didn't have a setup in that market yet. They were sort of, curious, but really nervous about going into that market. And they reached out to us because they found somebody they think that they could put on the ground to help them to ascertain the viability of that market for them. They would use our vehicle that's already in that country. As you mentioned in the preamble, we're in 187 of them. So we've got a lot of places covered for them, right? And we'd onboard that talent, and we do their payroll and their benefits, and they'd be able to sort of, through that individual, ascertain the veracity and viability of their business's opportunity in that market. And that's still a primary driver. However, in this new environment we're operating in, what's become increasingly clear, in fact, painfully clear to some countries and companies, is that the war for talent is making it such that there are so significant an amount of skills shortages that you've got to go outside of your domestic market. You've got to go outside of your backyard to find these people. In many instances, like in the technology space, if you're in Australia and you're in financial services sector, trying to find a data scientist is like trying to find a needle in a haystack, because they're all gainfully employed. They're gone. You're not going to get them. So what's the solution? The solution is to make the entire globe, the entire planet, your talent pool. Well, how do I do that and make sure that I'm compliant, I'm not, doing anything untoward, or I'm not exposing my IP to risk, and it's called employer of record, right? This is how it's done. So we're seeing a lot of people go down that path. Now, leaving my model for a moment, saying, what else do I see in the future? If I were to gaze in my crystal ball, you're going to see the war for talent go way beyond company to company. It's going to be country to country. And the sovereignty and the future economic security of countries is going to be predicated upon he or she that gets the best talent. And that doesn't necessarily mean that those countries have to have the talent in the country. Very quickly, you're going to start to see more countries adopt e-residency. You're going to see more digital nomad policies. And all of this is ostensibly, look, countries around the world have written incredibly large checks to keep their economy stimulated and running. You got to pay it back. And there are two ways to do that, right? One is through foreign direct investment, which creates jobs, which goes on to number two, which is taxes, right? So there's, various forms of taxation, and there's various forms of FDI. FDR is the smart money, because you bring the money in, sets up the company, creates the roles. Tax is the money that needs to keep the flow moving through the system. So what you're going to see is a whole litany of people deciding where they want to work, when they want to work, how they want to work, governments acting to attract that, and companies enabling that through different models like EOR as an example, to ensure that they have access to the services and talents of these global nomads. And I think that's going to be the future. I'm not saying that that's going to be carte blanche for everybody. I'm just saying that that's going to be an area that's going to be studied and invested in, and you're going to see a huge amount of innovation and disruption coming out of these models. That's going to go rifle through the entire economy. It's not just going to be at the company level. It's going to be, I mean, think about this. The G7 just came out with this concept paper around an international global tax rate, right? 15% minimum tax. Why do you think that happened, right? And that's just the beginning of all kinds of new things that are going to start to happen. So I cannot tell you how exciting I think this is going to be. And I think that companies that embrace it rather than lament it are the ones that are going to come out through the other side as the new brands of you know, who people look to as kind of the harbingers of the new economy.
So thanks for sharing the crystal gaze, Charles. I mean, in fact, what you sound is definitely seems to be happening on ground and not really futuristic, right?
Yeah, it's real time.
It's real time. For some industries, maybe a little bit into the future. For some other industries, like the information workers that you're talking about, it's probably starting to happen.
It is, and it'll evolve in different ways. We see it happening here in Singapore as an example. You know, just by virtue of labor constraints, jobs aren't necessarily going away, but they're changing. So even at the, you know, at our hawker centers, right? People will still be gainfully employed, but there's a lot of new policy and process and automation and things that are going to change the workplace. It's going to be an augmented reality that we're all going to operate in, whether you're an information worker or a taxi uncle. There's going to be an augmented reality of you and the robot that you work with. And that robot might be a real robot. It might be an automated piece of software, but there's going to be two in a box for every job moving forward.
Absolutely, no doubts about it. So one of the things that I really wanted to ask you is, Charles, how do we ensure, how do we encourage the HR teams, right, to be more data-driven and tech-savvy, right? And do you want to share some tips or from your extensive experience of working with them, what would you like to share?
Look, I alluded to it in a couple of different points that we discussed around, you know, the fact is that companies now, whether they like it or not, are having to adopt tech, right? So, you know, even at the most basic fundamental level of temperature screening when you walk in the door, right? There's a new sort of paradigm where technology is becoming increasingly part of the DNA or the fabric of day-to-day life inside the company. And we have skipped over probably, I would reckon, at least a decade to a decade and a half of incremental change in the past 18 months. And I can say that with a high degree of confidence because I've seen it happen literally physically seen it happen in some of the more traditional professional services type companies out there that heretofore had been predominantly focused on classic paperwork driven types of processes. And almost overnight, because of changes in government requirements, they've had to automate, right? They've had to OCR and start to do digital certification and all these different types of technologies. So that's just going to have a ripple effect across a whole litany of different businesses. And there is not a single solitary piece of the organization that is left out of that agenda change. Not one. HR cannot rest on their laurels. And I'll tell you this, mate, if they don't get with the program, they will be replaced. Simple as that. So I hate to sound so sort of like cavalier about it and maybe harsh, but if you don't make the effort, you will be replaced because the momentum is behind the business to make the change. So anyone who's kind of dragging their feet will ultimately be dragged behind the vehicle, right? And the vehicle has to change, or because, and I'll say this again for just to drive the point home, this is existential, right? This is no longer a choice. It's The choice is how fast are you going to do it, not if you are or aren't, right? So I would strongly advocate, back to my, kumbaya teamwork comment earlier, sit down with the team and ask, how can we in HR get involved in the technology story, right? The first, I was reading an article the other day and it really struck me. It was a cartoon, and I think it was like a mouse on top of an elephant going through the jungle. And the elephant asked the mouse, "What's the bravest thing you've ever said?" And the elephant said, "Help." Right? And I think that's super powerful. If you don't know what to do, and by the way, you're allowed not to know what to do, ask for help. And there are so many people in the business who are willing to reach out and partner with you, because again, this is about the most fundamental asset in the business. It's the people. And if you want to get sort of clinical about it, it's also the most expensive line item on the P&L, right? So everyone should be concerned on how we maximize the efficiency and efficacy of this particular line item on the P&L. But let's extrapolate that out and be human about it. It's also about the survivability of the business and the betterment and wellness of the people who contribute to the success of our company. So I would highly advocate that if HR doesn't know, there's almost no excuse to go out and get the information, because there's free information all over the world, all over the internet, all over the place, just to get some concepts down, and then take those concepts, bring them to the experts in the business. And if they don't know, go to the CEO and say, let's go find the experts, because we need to do something here. Study your competitors. What's going on in the industry? I think that HR has been relegated to the back of the house for so long that many practitioners are just, they know that they should be able to step up, but they haven't been given the opportunity. And so when the doors finally open, they're not quite sure how to cross the threshold, right? And they have permission.
I'm sure that's a great piece of advice, right? We need to go talk to the business, say how we can help them in executing their business, and also ask for help wherever required. And that's really the fulcrum. I completely agree with you on that. So the last question for the show is, we've seen companies get onto the journey. Yeah. First by automating, as you said, using RPA, and then they do digitalization. So they start their digital transformation journey with a small step, right? So yeah. There are enterprises of all sizes who are actually getting started off on their digital HR journey. Right?
All over the place, yeah.
All over the place, and more so in Singapore, as we have said, right? What was the single piece of advice that you will tell all those enterprises who are waiting to get onto the digital HR journey, or just starting off but really hesitant on the way forward? What is it that you would like to tell them?
Regardless of whether it's, on the sales, marketing, finance, HR, ops side, I think that right now there is such a unique opportunity to focus on the technology transformation that's going to fundamentally drive growth, right? And in my view, and this is going to also sound a little bit tired and cliche, but data analytics, as an example, is a critical area. And we're both in the HR tech space. I mean, one of the hottest things in the world right now is people analytics, right? So what a lot of companies sometimes forget in their search for value is that a lot of the value you're looking for is actually right underneath your nose. Mm-hmm. You have all of this data in your business that you might not even be aware of, and getting that data, sort of consolidated and collated, and then using business rules and the appropriate type of technology and some strategic planning, being able to take that data and drive data-driven insights out of that data is an incredible way to, success breeds success, right? So if you start to go down that path of, realizing you can measure nearly everything in your business if you do it the right way, right? So if you do the digital transformation the right way, it should be all about, frankly, as you alluded to earlier, data and the analytics behind that data. And I think, more than 75%, 80% of the Fortune 500 companies in the world right now are already implementing machine learning and data analytics into their organizations. You don't have to be that big to extract the value from this. I'm saying this because at the foundation of every single tech stack, and my background, I started my career at Intel, went to Microsoft, went to Salesforce.com, went to SAP, and then on into HR through my ADP experiences and up till date. In all of the aforementioned kind of 4 key companies, particularly those 3 software companies, and even in payroll with ADP, it all fundamentally comes down to the data, right? If you get that data done right, the modeling and the analytics and the machine learning and all the various kind of levers off of that data, one of the things that you have to understand, and I think that any HR person can understand and grip and learn and digest with a tech partner, is that you have from there this incredible explosive network effect through the APIs, right? Through application programmable interfaces, you can now take that data and extrapolate exponential amounts of values and insights into all kinds of different systems. But you have to start at the foundation, right? So you don't come in on the top of like a CRM and start thinking to yourself, well, if we roll out this customer relationship management program, we're going to have all this ability to sell. It's like, no, you're wrong. First, you have to get the data together and clean it, and deduplicate it, make sure that it's got integrity and the models are set properly, et cetera. And then once you've got that, then you can start doing some really base level business intelligence, right? Then you start to do the integrations into these systems. It's the same for HR. So I can't tell you how many companies I've worked with in the past. When I went to HR, they didn't even know hand to heart how many employees they actually had, right? And where they were and things of this nature. I mean, I could tell you stories maybe over a glass of your favorite beverage at some point in the future that would make you laugh. Now, look, I'm not judging these people. This is an endemic, this is a challenge for a lot of different companies. But technology as a tool could help solve these things, because at the end of the day, it's about visibility. And I think starting it at the data level is a great way to get started in really driving adoption.
Absolutely. I mean, if you want to accomplish something, you got to start measuring it. And
totally right.
And there's pockets of data all across the organization.
It's crazy.
You just have to focus on accumulating it, start putting in the right metrics for measurement, right. and voila, you got what you want actually.
And I think that HR oftentimes might get intimidated. That's because right. It's so out of my comfort zone, or it's so big, or whatever. Look, if you just remove the whole concept of the technology, remove the whole concept of data as these bits and bytes and sources of information, and start thinking about it as a farmer. If you're going to go out to the field, you want to, before you go out and start planting your crops and deciding when you're going to harvest the fruit from those crops, you got to know how many acres you've got. Does it require fertilizer? Where's the seed? You just need to think logically and put the steps together. And again, I can't advocate this enough, because I see it in our business. When we speak to someone who's looking to bring on board a talent, we often will say to them, okay, great, this is wonderful. Let's get the team together so that everyone understands what that really looks like and what the positive impact is going to be by reducing the time to value, right? What is the knock-on effect for the business? Get legal involved. I remember when I was in tech, selling software, sometimes we try to kind of just get to the decision maker and who we thought was the decision maker and close the deal, right? In this type of business, we want everybody involved in the conversation, because this is about people, right? And so, yeah, I totally agree with you. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. So partnership is key, internal and external.
So if it's all about people, you need to ensure that everyone is on board. That's a
Totally.
very positive statement to end our show, Charles. It was
Wonderful.
a real pleasure having you on our show, and we hope to have you in our future sessions too.
I look forward to it, my friend. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Charles.
Take care.
Bye-bye.